Now I want to share the secret to glory and blame. You can't give away glory and you can't give away blame. Let me explain. So I had a team down in Louisiana and we pulled off something totally amazing. I'm not going to go into details, but we did something totally amazing. And so what I did is I sent out an email and it said basically what great people my team, what the team members were, right? And I copied my boss and my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss. What do you think happened? And I didn't take any credit for anything when I did that. What do you think happened next? Well, Haggard, this couldn't have happened without you, right? So you shouldn't try to give away glory. You can't give away glory. So give glory to other people and it'll shine back on you. But blame, you can't give it away either. So you shouldn't try. When you have a bunch of people responsible, or that you're responsible for, and one of them does something really stupid, who's responsible for that? You are, right? Now, does it help for you to say, oh, but Bob's an idiot? No, you say, look, my group, my responsibility, I take the responsibility here, I will take care of this problem. You get the problem fixed. Do you have a talk with Bob? You have a very intense talk with Bob, but you're not trying to give away the blame. And if you find yourself in a situation where you've got to blame something and you don't have anyone good to blame, just do what the news media and the politicians do and blame global warming. Any questions? Okay, so let's get back to work here. Oh, for shame, he's late. What's the shirt? Sweet.
No shame.
Okay, no, there's still plenty of shame. Here's the big shame. That concert happened in '75. I was 4 years old. You weren't even around, right? Okay, so we are going to be talking about gains from acquisitions. So remember, the only reason we do something in corporate finance is to maximize shareholder wealth. So anything that we do has to have positive NPV. And if it's going to have positive NPV, it means it has to have some sort of gain that comes from it. And so what we need to do is figure out where these gains come from. By the way, when we're looking at net present value projects, we're always looking at the incremental cash flows, and that's what we're going to need to be looking at with these acquisitions too. So we've got possible cash flow benefits in these 4 different areas, and I'm going to go through each one of these in detail. So first of all, we've got revenue enhancement. And revenue enhancement, so we're talking about boosting the top line. And the first one here is marketing gains. And you'll hear people say, like for instance, when Sprint was buying Nextel, they said, well, you know, our advertising agency is so much better. If we put the same advertising budget with our agency, we'll get way more business. Now, it turned out it was total horse crap, but that was what they were shooting at there. Now, more importantly and more realistic is distribution. Here's my example. I'm a goat farmer in Springfield. I've got a bunch of goats. Oh, for shame, he's late, and that shirt is not nearly as cool as the KISS shirt. Okay, so I'm a goat farmer in Springfield. I got a bunch of goats, and we've been milking the goats and making goat cheese. You guys eat goat cheese? Yeah, it's getting more popular. It used to be just people from the Middle East, maybe some Latino people, and then so hippies maybe, and my wife and me. That was about it. And so here in town, the market for goat cheese, pretty small comparatively. Now, we have another cheese business here in town, Kraft. Did you know that Kraft has a plant here? And they actually have some cooled warehouse space out at the underground where they keep cheese. By the way, they sold, weirdly, Kraft sold its cheese operations to a French company. I'm sure the French people were horrified at what we call cheese. Anyway, back to the story. So, I am this goat guy, and because the demand for goat cheese in Springfield is so low, I'm basically selling it for $1 a pound. I'm not even breaking even on this stuff. It's just so sad. But what if Kraft were to buy my goat cheese operation? They have a distribution system that goes all over the world. And at the very least, I could be then selling my cheese into the Middle Eastern population in Michigan or some of the other populations in other parts of the country where people actually do eat goat cheese. And so it's that expanded distribution network that's going to lead to an increase in sales. And because now I'm selling it out to an area that has higher demand for that, I'm going to be able to get a higher price. That's revenue enhancement. And so that's a legitimate thing, this idea of the distribution network. Next, we'll talk about strategic benefits. It may not be that I'm seeking to get into the exact business that I am buying. Maybe I'm getting into that business, but I've got ideas to go beyond that. So, for example, if you roll back in time, at one point we did not have toilet paper. Did you guys know that? Toilet paper is relatively recent invention. Bless you. A relatively recent invention. In fact, the patent probably only 150 years old, and the big breakthrough was not having splinters in the toilet paper. Did you guys know that toilet paper is made out of wood? Yeah, that look says it all right there. You don't want to splinter your toilet paper. Okay, so you might think it's easy to make toilet paper, but it's actually kind of a technical achievement. So, Procter & Gamble. By the way, what does Procter & Gamble start out making? Soap, laundry detergent, that sort of stuff. In fact, Procter & Gamble was the sponsor of those daytime dramas on television, and that's why they are called soap operas, because all the commercials were for soap because they were sponsored by Procter & Gamble. Okay, so Procter & Gamble decides that they want to get into this consumer paper market, so they buy Charmin. Do you guys know Charmin? Yeah, they buy Charmin, and then they not only learn how to do that business, but now they have the ability to move into some related areas. What else can you think of that they could move into after having mastered making toilet paper?
Paper towels?
Yeah, paper towels look like toilet paper for giant people, right? It's just a bigger roll. So it's the same idea. And splinters are also not good there. What else? Yeah, facial tissues. So that's another one. Another place you also don't want splinters. And then they actually expand, and with their newfound knowledge on how to handle these various things that come off of people, they come up with Pampers, disposable diapers, 1967. You guys probably don't realize disposable diapers, relatively new invention. I was the last of my cousins to be put in cotton diapers. Everyone else was in disposable diapers. And so buying Charmin not only gave them the ability to work in the toilet paper area, but it also gave them the knowledge to be able to expand into these other areas. And then we have market power. If you buy a competitor, then it gives you the opportunity to raise prices, because if you will assume that there's only 2 competitors in the field, now you are a monopoly. But you have to be careful, because the Federal Trade Commission will investigate you and your firm. Now, the Federal Trade Commission is federal. Can you do this within the state and get by with it? The answer is yes. And here's my example. When I went to the University of Missouri, we were located exactly halfway between Kansas City and St. Louis. Our local airport was a Columbia Regional Airport, or CRAP. That was the acronym, CRAP. And it's the kind of place that you had to hold a chicken on your lap when you flew up, because it was just really bad. Okay, now, what does that mean? It means anyone living in Columbia most likely is going to fly out of St. Louis or Kansas City. It was 2 hours either way, and you really just kind of flipped a coin, saw where it was cheaper, and you went there. Here's the problem. Most of the flights for business people, you're wanting to get out earlier in the day so you can actually get business done. And so that means that your flight's taking off at 6 or 7 a.m. That means that you have to be there, not only you got a 2-hour drive, and you got to be there early because of terrorists and whatnot. Anyway, long story short, you had really drowsy business people driving in both directions. And so there were some hippies in Columbia, named Doc and Tom. And Doc and Tom, of course, hippies always have vans, so they decided they were going to take their van and start a service where they would actually drive these people to St. Louis and to Kansas City to catch their planes and then pick them up when they come back. And they can charge pretty good for this because, number one, the employer's having to cover the mileage for the employees. Number two, they're having to cover the parking. And number three, the employer really doesn't want their drowsy employees zipping back and forth on I-70. And so Doc and Tom are able to charge a pretty good price for this. And then business is so good, they decide that they can get a second van because after all, you've got two hippies, two vans, you can double your business, right? And so then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and it becomes known as Tiger Express. Some out-of-state business people come in and decide they like this business. And so they offer Doc and Tom quite a bit of money for it. Doc and Tom take the money. Now, unfortunately, the out-of-state business people were too stupid to have, they were so stupid they didn't have Doc and Tom sign a non-compete agreement. So, after Doc and Tom took some time off, visited Amsterdam, did some other stuff, then they decided that they were just going to start another business. So they started another business called MoX, doing exactly the same thing as Tiger Express. And of course they're sitting on a pile of money, so they do advertising. And well, it's like them surfing on the top of one of their new vans going, "Hey man, we're back." And so it's like people are like, "Oh hey, it's the hippies." And by the way, Tiger Express was charging $50. MoX only charged 40. What does Tiger Express have to do the very next day? Yeah, they got to drop down to 40 or they're going to lose business, right? And so then Doc and Tom are like, well, that's cool. They drop it down to 35. Well, keep in mind that Doc and Tom are sitting on a pile of money. The Tiger Express people are sitting on a pile of debt. Nobody from Kansas City ever calls me on purpose. Okay, so they're sitting on a pile of debt. They can't lower their prices too far. And so at some point they finally say, you know what, Doc and Tom, would you buy us out? And Doc and Tom buy them out for something like 25 cents on the dollar, right? And then they put it all back together and it's all one company again and it's all Tiger Express. Now, here's the interesting part. What happened to the price of a ticket the very next day? Whoop! Right back to where it was. That's market power. That's market power. Now, why didn't the FTC get involved? Yeah, it's all in Missouri. In fact, people were like, hey, why don't you go over to Spirit Airport in Illinois, you know, since you're that close. And they're like, no way, man. We don't want the feds in our business. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the market power. Questions? Now let's talk about cost reduction. One of the things you often hear about in mergers are economies of scale. We only need one CEO, we only need one CFO, we only need one corporate headquarters, we only need one mainframe computer, and so forth. So anytime you hear economies of scale mentioned in a merger, you know they're going to be, number one, getting rid of some people, and number two, probably getting rid of some assets like corporate headquarters and computers and stuff like that. If you ever hear someone say they're doing economies of scale, but everyone's going to keep their jobs, know fully that that person is a lying sack of crap. Okay, now, we're spreading now that same amount of expense, basically one corporate headquarter, one CFO, one CEO, we're spreading that over the production of both companies. And so the amount of fixed cost per unit of production, whether it's a good or a service, the fixed cost per unit drops, and so that's cost reduction. Then we have the economies of vertical integration. We talked about this earlier when I talked about the drilling, that I like to be able to control that. It allowed me to make better promises to my customers. And by the way, if I can get something to them faster, they're willing to pay more for it because they're having to pay rental on these rigs offshore. So there were some economies to be had there with vertical integration. Also, think about if you are in a situation, if you're an oil refiner and suddenly oil prices spike like crazy. Now you've got to go out and get a bunch of cash to buy your next bunch of oil. But what if the oil that you're using actually came out of your own wells? Yeah, you're fine, right? And you're still going to raise the price on your finished product to represent the higher value of that oil, but you're not having to go out there and scrap and compete in the markets to try to get the oil necessary to keep your refinery running. And then we have the complementary resources story. And the most common one that we tell is the patio and fireplace store. A patio, for those of you who do not know, it's usually a square, and it's either wood or concrete or brick. It's basically a little sitting area outside of your home. And people tend to sit out there when the weather is nice. When is the weather nice in Missouri?
Never.
No, hardly ever. So a couple of weeks in the spring, a couple of weeks in the fall, but my neighbors are on their patio basically all summer long, just staring at our house. I don't know why. Okay, back to the story. So patio stores in the summertime, they're doing a great job. They're selling barbecue grills, they're selling patio furniture, stuff like that. But then when the winter hits, no one wants to sit on their patio, and so the patio store is pretty empty. However, a place that is jumping is the fireplace store. All things related to fireplaces. When are people interested in sitting in front of their fireplace? In the winter time. So, how could you put these two companies together and have a benefit? Well, what if we just put them into the same building? So I'm the patio guy, I buy out the fireplace guy, we consolidate everything into one store, and now the store is full year-round, and I don't have this dead season, and I've been able to shrink the assets overall of the firm. Does that make sense? Now, another example would be the ski resort. For those of you who are unfamiliar with skiing, there's usually a hill involved. And there will be, up here at the top, this of the ski track. This is where the skiers take off. And then down here at the bottom, what is typically at the bottom?
A lodge.
A lodge. So here's the ski lodge. And that's where people stay when they come to ski. Now, when do people ski? In the winter. So in the summer, what do you think the occupancy rate is for the lodge? It's pretty crappy, right? If at all there's anybody there. So here's what we do. We're like, hey, what if we go out here on this flat spot and build us a golf course? Now people can come play golf in the summer, stay in the lodge. They can ski in the winter, stay in the lodge, and we can keep the lodge more occupied throughout the entire year. So that's another example of complementary resources. Any questions?
My favorite ski lodge back at home,
Uh-huh.
they have a wolf sanctuary.
They have a what?
A wolf sanctuary.
A wolf
Right
sanctuary.
next to the ski lodge.
Oh, wow.
So in the summertime, you can go pet wolves.
Oh, interesting. That's also handy because when a skier gets really severely injured, the wolves just take care of it. By the way, should you pet wolves? No, I wouldn't. I was on Gibraltar with some of those wild monkeys, and they're like, don't pet the monkeys. And I saw this 15-year-old girl holding a baby monkey, and I saw mom heading across the ground toward the girl, and I'm like, we gotta get out of here. Don't pet the wolves. There's your public service message for the day. Okay, questions?
So the complementary resources, I'm kind of thinking of like Spirit Halloween, on how they come in for like 2 weeks and then leave. Why don't they dip into other holidays or expand?
They have a Christmas line now.
They do?
Exactly! So Spirit Halloween, they're like the freaking hermit crab of the retail world. They just back into a shell where something else has died, right? And his question was, well, why don't they get into other stuff? Well, the truth is now they're getting into Christmas. So they're going to have, apparently it'll be the Christmas Spirit store, right? And they'll just get longer leases. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah. Okay, other questions? By the way, do you think Spirit Halloween had anything to do with the decline of Party City? Is that what you just said?
I said it takes the conversation.
Yeah, so Party City, that was their biggest holiday, was Halloween. And Spirit Halloween, by the way, Spirit Halloween, what is their asset base? It's just whatever crap they've got in storage, right? Party City has to have all those buildings. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that Party City is dead. Okay, and now I told you that you could lower your taxes by doing a merger or by doing an acquisition. But you got to be careful, because if you say that lowering taxes is the only reason that you're doing it, then the IRS will get all over you, so don't do that. So let's talk about the first way. We've got the use of tax losses. What if there's the target company is a perennial loser? Which, by the way, a lot of target companies are perennial losers because it makes their stock cheap and it makes them an easy takeover target. And they have all these losses. Now, the United States government will not give you a tax refund for making a loss, but they will let you do what are called tax loss carryforwards. And when I buy another firm, then I can use that company's tax loss carryforwards to reduce my own taxable income. And so in this way, I'm actually reducing the overall taxes of the firm. Would you want to buy a business that was a perennial loser because it was a crappy business model, like Sky Mall? You guys remember Sky Mall? Yeah. No, you want a business you can otherwise salvage, but hey, if they got a bunch of losses from the previous crappy management, you can use it to write down your taxes. Okay, now, the use of unused debt capacity. We've talked in here before how the capital structure of the firm should be dependent on the industry. So if you're in banking, you've got 90% debt. If you're in electric utilities, it's going to be like 50% debt. If you're in something very risky like biotechnology, it's going to be 0% debt. So what if you go out and find a target that is under leveraged? Let's assume you're going to buy an electric utility and they are running on 20% debt. What I could do is buy them, and then I could use that unused debt capacity that they have, take them up to 50% debt, use that borrowed money to buy back shares. Now, what's the benefit there? Tax shield of debt. Remember, interest is tax deductible. And so they're leaving money on the table now by not using debt in their capital structure. This reminds me of my cousin. He had maxed out all his credit cards, and so he couldn't buy anything else. But then he married this lovely nurse who had a sterling credit rating. What do you think he did? He tanked it, yeah. She had unused debt capacity. He's like, woohoo, right? Here's the weird thing, they're still together 25 years later. I think he got better with money. Okay, so that's the use of unused debt capacity. Then use of surplus funds. This is getting a little sketchy here. Who does the money belong to at the firm? Shareholders. If I don't have any positive NPV projects, what should I be doing with the money at the firm? Giving it back to the shareholders. Dividends, share repurchases. But sometimes people are like, well, it's better for us to go ahead and invest those surplus funds, even if it's a slightly negative NPV project, because we don't want our shareholders to have to pay dividend taxes. That is total crap. So don't buy that story when you hear it. This one on the end, though, actually does make sense. The ability to write up depreciable assets. Remember when we talked about when you buy another firm, you're not simply taking their assets and adding them to your assets, you're adding them on at the fair market value of those assets. And so my machines in my operation in Dallas, Texas, they all have 0 book value. So in a pooling of interest, they would have showed up being added on at 0. But if you're using the purchase accounting method, which is what we have to do now, they're going to be on there at values anywhere from $50,000 to $300,000. And even though they are old machines, they are new to me, so I can depreciate them all over again. Now, this sounds like it should be illegal. Maybe, maybe not, who knows? But it's not illegal. And so there were actually 2 businesses in Arkansas, 2 real estate businesses, and they were selling like apartment complexes back and forth to each other, and so they could get the depreciation. Now, what has to happen here in order for that to work is that there has to be some situation on the taxes, capital gains versus uh, corporate taxes. It gets a little hairy, but apparently they figured out how to make it work because the two people that owned them both got really wealthy. Okay, questions? And then finally, we have reduction in capital needs. And this, you could think about this kind of like a patio and fireplace store. They actually were able to reduce the amount of assets that they needed by consolidating into one building. Let's talk about if you have a firm that needs, so Hyundai, let's just use Hyundai. Hyundai, of course, they used to be more popular before they got stolen, right? We've had 6 Hyundais stolen here on campus, something like that. Okay, so back to this story. Hyundai, their factories run pretty much at 100%. If they want to sell more cars, what do they have to do? Yeah, they got to build more factories. An alternative would be to buy a manufacturer that has a lower percentage utilization on their plants. For example, our friends at Chrysler, or now Stellantis, right? By the way, we've settled our argument from last time. It's an 8-speed transmission, so we were both off by 2. Okay, so back to the story. Chrysler plants running around 65% capacity. What could Hyundai do? Hyundai could come in, buy Chrysler, and then start producing, use some of their empty factory space to start making Hyundais instead of building their own factory. And so that would be a reduction of capital needs. We're not having to build an entirely new factory. We're just taking up space in another factory that already exists. Now let's talk about avoiding mistakes. First of all, don't ignore market values. If the market says that a firm as a standalone is only worth $20 a share, how much do you think it's actually worth? $20 a share. Do not think that you are smarter than the market. Do not think, and it's amazing how many people do. They're like, oh yeah, that company's worth at least $25 a share, especially after you bring in me, right? This is the manager, the bidding manager talking. How often does that come to pass? Yeah, seldom. So don't ignore market values. If the market says it's only worth $20 a share, that's our best guess of what the true value is. Secondly, only estimate incremental cash flows. I see this all the time. When people talk about the acquisition and they say, oh yeah, it's going to raise our earnings per share. Well, no crap. If you go out and buy a profitable firm using cash, then when you divide the net incomes of both of them added together by the same number of shares, of course it's going to increase your earnings per share. But is it incremental? Did you have synergy there? Is it a positive NPV project? So don't trust people when they talk about this inflation of EPS being a good reason for a merger. Then you want to make sure you use the correct discount rate. Remember that anytime we're doing an NPV analysis, we have to know what the correct discount rate is. If I'm buying a target firm, whose rate should I use? My rate or the rate they've been using? Yeah, theirs, because the assets that I'm buying are their risky assets, right? They have a better idea what that required return is than I do. For example, when I was working for Halliburton, we acquired a Scottish company. And the Scottish company had come up with, by the way, all oil wells produce oil, natural gas, and salt water. You like the oil, you like the natural gas, you don't like the salt water. Well, these Scotsmen had invented a valve that would send data to a satellite, and that data would go to a computer, and then it would figure out there was an algorithm, and it would send it back, and it would adjust the valve to minimize the production of salt water, because you just got to re-inject it in the ground. It's expensive. And so this is some really kind of new, edgy kind of stuff. And we used our corporate cost of capital to justify the merger. Our corporate cost of capital was 11.9%. When I was talking to the Scotsman after we bought them, I said, just curious, what were you guys using for your discount rate? And they said, oh, 25%. This is some risky shit, right? Should we have been using 11.9%? I'm sorry, my Scottish accent's really crappy. Should we have used 11.9? No, we should have been using 25%, right? So use the target's discount rate, not the bidding discount rate. And then we need to beware of transactions costs. So anytime we do one of these, we've got to have investment bankers involved. We know they're expensive. If we have to issue new shares in order to be able to afford to do this, then we have flotation costs. We've got legal fees, we've got lawyers involved, especially if we're having to retitle a bunch of assets. And then we also have disclosure requirements. It turns out when I'm trying to merge with another firm, I might have to disclose some information I wouldn't have to otherwise. Information that might be good for my competitors to know, so I don't want them to know that. So we talked about the idea of conglomerate acquisition for purposes of diversification in a publicly traded firm being a bad idea. And the reason it's a bad idea is because these transaction costs are so high. Merger costs run into the millions. How can I diversify my portfolio without buying a firm that has gone through a consolidated or a conglomerate merger? I just buy the S&P 500 index, right? And I'm instantly diversified. And what's my commission for doing that anymore? Actually, anymore it's zero, right? So the whole idea that they're diversifying the company for you is horse crap, because they're having to spend millions of dollars to do it when you could do it for yourself for free. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, finally, I know you guys have been dying for some math here. We have the incremental gain from the acquisition. Remember, we only want to look at what's going to be different as a result. And we call that incremental gain delta V. And this is, it's V sub AB is the value of the merged firm. V sub AB is the value of the merged firm. V sub A is the standalone value of the bidding firm. V sub B is the standalone value of the target firm. And if delta V is greater than 0, then we have synergy. If you don't have a positive delta V, you stop the analysis right here and you don't buy the target. Now, the next question is, what am I willing to pay for for firm B, the target? And the answer is VB star. VB star is the standalone value of B plus the incremental value of the merger. So I'm willing to pay up to that amount for the target. But keep in mind, if I pay the entire amount VB star, all of the gains of the acquisition go to the target shareholders. As the manager of the bidding firm, what group of shareholders am I responsible to? The bidding shareholders or the target shareholders? Yeah, the bidding shareholders. And so I really want this to be something less than VB star, or it will not be a positive NPV project. By the way, NPV is equal to VB star minus the cost that we're actually going to have to endure to acquire firm B. And if that cost is lower than VB star, then this is a positive NPV project. Now, before we move on, let's discuss some things here. Do you think delta V is known with certainty? No. Who is estimating delta V? The bidding managers. Do the bidding managers want the merger to go through? Yes. Because empire building, if for no other reason. Okay, so what does that mean they're going to do with their estimate of delta V? Yeah, it's going to be optimistic, let's say. It's going to be optimistic. Now, what do you think about the cost to acquire firm B? Do you think they're going to also inflate it, or will they lowball it? Lowball. Yeah, they're going to lowball it. And so they're going to be saying the NPV is going to be a certain amount. But then when they make the announcement, a funny thing happens. You can actually look at the change in the share value, multiply it by the number of shares outstanding, this is for the bidding firm, and see what the market thinks the NPV is. probably going to be lower than what the managers think. And what does it mean if the share value actually goes down? What does the market think of this acquisition? Yeah, it's actually a value-destroying acquisition, which we see a lot when we're looking at conglomerate acquisitions. Okay, so we only accept positive NPV acquisitions. So here we have our acquisition cost example. We have two firms, Firm A and Firm B. Firm A is selling for $20 per share, 25 shares outstanding. 20 times 25 is 500. That is your total market value for Firm A. That would be V sub A. And then we have Firm B. They've got 10 shares outstanding at $10 a share, so that's $100 total market value for Firm B. So that would be V sub B. Both firms are 100% equity. We estimate delta V to be 100. That's that incremental gain from the merger. Firm B's board will sell for 150. So they are willing to sell for the 100 standalone value of the firm plus a 50 merger premium. Now, how much is that per share? 150 divided by how many shares are outstanding? Yeah, it's 15, isn't it? Yeah, it's 15. So it's a $10 share firm now, and they want $15 per share. $10 of that is the standalone value. $5 is merger premium. Okay, now let's see if this is a worthwhile kind of thing. First of all, let's figure out VB star. VB star is equal to V sub B, which is the standalone value of the target, plus the incremental value of the merger. So the standalone value was 100, the incremental value was 100. We add those together and we get 200. So VB star is 200. How do I get the NPV? Well, the NPV is just going to be VB star, which is 200. We just calculated that, minus the cost to Firm A to acquire Firm B. And they said they will sell for 150. And so 200 minus 150 is 50. That's positive, and we would accept it. By the way, on exams, if it's positive, we accept it. In the real world, what if this NPV was 12 cents? Yeah, we reject it because it's too close, right? You get too much at risk.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
if it's in real world, negative, no, even if it's near zero, no, and then on the test, if it's positive at all, just so.
Yeah, if it's positive at all, accept it on the exam. But in the real world, use a little common sense, right? Oh, yeah. By the way, common sense is one of those things that, you know how you learn common sense? Making mistakes and suffering the consequences. You think anyone's born with common sense? Did your mom tell you to not touch the hot stove? And what did you do? You touched the hot stove, right? So, are you going to go out there and instantly have common sense? No. After you get burnt once or twice? Maybe. Okay, now, what's the new price per share? Well, keep in mind that the standalone value of the bidder was 100, and now we are adding the NPV. What was it, 100? Oh, sorry, I was thinking of the wrong firm. The standalone value of A is 500, right? And so now we know the share price is going to go up by the per share amount of NPV. So I'm going to take that 500 and I'm going to add the 50. That brings me up to 550. And then I'm going to divide by the number of shares outstanding. By the way, this is a cash deal. How many new shares were issued? None. And so Firm A still has 25 shares outstanding. What's 550 divided by 25? It's 22, right? And so what we see there is a $2 per share gain. So this is a good acquisition. If we announce this acquisition in the open market, what should happen to our share price immediately upon announcement? Yeah, it should pop up. It won't go quite to $2 a share simply because there is a less than 100% probability that the merger will go through. The government can get involved. We might not be able to raise financing, things like that. Okay, questions so far? Yeah.
Would we like estimate daily by NPV projected cash flow?
Yeah, so what you would do, so you remember all those gains, revenue enhancements, all that? What we would do is look at what is the incremental for each one of those. How much do we think we can gain by that bigger distribution system? How much do we think we can gain through economies of scale? And by the way, every single one of those is a swag, right? A scientific wild-ass guess. Does that make sense? So that's where we're coming up with what we think the firm's going to be worth after the merger. Good question. Other questions? Okay. Now, let's talk about the stock case. So in a cash merger, then the target shareholders go away. They're no longer participating. They just take their cash and walk away. But if we do a stock merger, then the target shareholders end up being shareholders in the new firm. Now, that means that we're going to have issue some additional shares to give to these target shareholders in order for them to hand over their shares in the target firm. There are a couple of dangers there. Number one, we're reducing the amount of the percentage of the cash flows that come to us, right? Because now we're inviting other people to the party. And the other thing is there's a potential if we give out enough stock to the target shareholders that they might be able to actually take over the firm. So a couple of things to keep in mind if you're going to do one of these stock mergers. Now, the good news is the value of the firm after merger is real easy to come up with here. It's just a standalone value of A plus a standalone value of B plus the incremental value. And that is 500 plus 100 plus 100, which is 700. Now, keep in mind, we said that the value of the merged firm in the cash case was only 550. Why is it only 550, but this is 700? Ms. Hago.
Well, are you not taking out the value of Murphy?
Yeah, so you're having that 150 in cash that walked away and went with the target shareholders. It's gone, folks. And so that's why the value of the merged firm in a cash merger is 150 lower than it would be in a stock merger because no cash is leaving the firm. This is where it gets a little funky. How many shares did A issue to buy B? Well, B says they need 150. Our shares are currently trading at $20 per share. That means we need to issue 7.5 shares. And don't get hung up on the decimals. I actually own shares, decimal shares in some things because of mergers and crap, so don't worry about that. So now what are the total shares outstanding for the firm A? It's actually 32.5 shares. And so if we want to find the per share value of the merged firm, it's that combined value of 700 divided by 32.5. And so the new share value is $21.54. That means those shares that we gave up weren't worth $20, they were worth $21.54. So in order to figure out what the true cost of this acquisition is, I have to take this new share value of $21.54 and multiply it by the number of shares that I had to create in order to buy the target firm. And so it's 7.5 shares times 21.54 shares per share. That's $161.55, which is $11.55 more than if we had done the cash acquisition. So what's the NPV now? Well, it's 200, which is VB star minus 161.55. So our NPV now is only $38.45 versus 50 as it was in the cash acquisition. And so the NPV is actually lower. Why? Because we're having to share the gains with the target shareholders. We're not keeping that for ourselves, we're having to share it. If you do your math there and take your 38.45 divided by the 25 original shares, which by the way, that's how we're figuring the NPV here is for the original shareholders, you come out to the same $1.54, so the new share price is 20 plus 154, it comes out the same. Now, you say, well, the numbers are a little different here, and it's because we're having to share the gains with the target shareholders. Knowing that, which would you rather do? And forgetting the taxes for the target shareholders for the minute, which would you rather do? Pay cash or offer shares? Yeah, I'd rather pay cash. But oftentimes we see people offering shares, so we need to understand why that might be. Do people like to share good things? No. Remember, we're all scumbags, right? Do people like to share bad things? Yeah. Would you like to share your loss on a project? Yeah. Would you like to share your pain with someone else? Yeah. You ever heard the expression, misery loves company? Okay, now what does that mean? If this offering of shares means that the target shareholders have to share in the gains, that also means that they are into sharing the losses. Does that make sense?
Is it possible to do a combination of the two?
Oh, cash, yes, yes.
Can you do both?
Oh, yeah. So in fact, we see a lot of deals that are a combination of cash and stock. Very good point. In fact, I would say most. You'll see most of the big ones, you'll see a combo. Okay. Now, so when I see someone offering shares instead of cash, I always say, why would they do that? Because we know cash gives you a higher NPV. Think about this. What if you, the bidding firm, are sitting around with a stock value that you know is inflated? You know your stock is not worth as much as the current stock price. Are you going to offer cash or stock for a merger? Yeah, you're going to offer stock. Now, what if you're sitting there and you think the market undervalues your firm? Which are you going to offer, cash or stock? Cash. And so the offering of stock can be a signal that the bidding firm managers think their shares are overvalued. By the way, if the bidding firm managers think their shares are overvalued, what should you think? Shares are overvalued. By the way, most managers, on average, do they think their shares are overvalued or undervalued? Oh, the market just hasn't recognized the beauty of my genius, right? And so if they are actually admitting even to themselves that their stock is overvalued, it's probably time for you to sell. Does that make sense? Okay, I'll give you a big example here. Back in the 90s, we had America Online, AOL, and it's how we first got online with our 56K modems dialing up over the telephone. And AOL was big, and people were like, there's just no end to the amount of money AOL can make. And it was just growing like crazy. And so it had this super high stock valuation. So they do what a lot of internet companies do, and they start thinking, we know only if we had control of content. So let's go out and buy some content. And so they go out and buy Time Warner. They go out and buy Time Warner. And in the beginning, oh, by the way, do you think they paid cash or stock? Stock. Because the stock was overvalued. They go out and buy Time Warner. And in the beginning, the company's called AOL Time Warner. But then AOL, the bloom comes off the rose, and we all realize that it's not everything that everybody thought it was. And then the Time Warner starts to be Time Warner AOL. And then after a while, Time Warner kind of spins off AOL, and it's just like a little bitty hairball compared to what it was to begin with. Why did AOL put their stock up? Because they knew it was vastly overvalued. If you are a target shareholder and someone offers you their shares, be suspicious. Okay, Taxes. Cash usually does result in taxes. Who's paying these taxes? Ooh, it's the target shareholder, right? Because let's say they bought the shares for 20, I'm offering them 30, now they have a capital gain of $10 per share that they're gonna have to pay taxes on. As a manager, I am responsible for the net present value to my current shareholders. Should I give a flying fig about the taxes that the target shareholders are going to have to pay? No. Now, and they may bid up the price to try to cover that, but that's okay. That's fine. They can do that. And then finally, control. I kind of mentioned this a little earlier. If you issue too many shares to do these stock deals, you end up possibly losing control. So you don't want to do that. So which is more popular in the real world? And the answer is usually cash. Anytime you see Apple going out and buying someone, Apple, first of all, did Apple make big acquisitions? No, they tend to buy companies that have the technology that they want. And it's cheaper to buy the technology or to buy the company than to license the technology. So they'll buy the company. In those cases, they always pay cash. And so most acquisitions are not huge, and they are with cash. As you get bigger, you're more likely to see stock come into play, and as Ms. Rissmiller pointed out, you end up with some combo deals. And a lot of times the negotiating back and forth comes down to, well, what proportion is going to be cash and what proportion is going to be stock. Do you think the target shareholders ever bargain for more stock, please? No, it's always more cash. Okay, and we already talked about the adverse selection problem. It's a form of signaling when they offer shares instead of offering cash. It signals that the shares might be overvalued. Now earlier I said when they make the offer that if it's positive NPV, the share price will go up. What if it's slightly negative? It's still positive that the share price will go up because it could be a signal of the free cash flows at the bidding firm. Next week, I drive in here in a brand new Porsche 911. And you say, Dr. Haggard, nice car. I say, thanks. And then I say, paid cash for it. As soon as I say that, what just happened to your estimate of my personal wealth? Yeah, it's higher, right? You're like, whoa, this guy's got it going on. Now, same thing with firms. There may be cash flows that aren't immediately transparently available to the investing public, but when they start swinging around huge bags of cash, we're like, whoa, maybe they're in better shape than I thought. Maybe the firm's undervalued, at which point the share price might go up even if the project is slightly negative net present value. Isn't that freaky? I thought that was freaky. Okay. Now let's talk about the defensive actions. We've talked a little bit about this. Takeover defenses, if they are used to get a higher bid out of the bidding firm, then that is living out the goal of financial management. You're maximizing the shareholder wealth of the target shareholders. However, if they are used to prevent a takeover, then you are cheating the target shareholders out of that merger premium, and you are not living out the goal of financial management. And I've already told you about Jerry Yang at Yahoo. In the end, he actually destroyed quite a bit of shareholder value there. So let's talk about some of these different things that you can do. Well, first of all, we've got the corporate charter, and that's the rules of the road. And the corporate charter is set up by the founders before the firm goes public. So they can choose to put anything in there they want. And they could put in there that they need a supermajority required to approve mergers. Maybe it's 2/3, maybe it's 3/4, but it's not going to be 50% plus 1. And then we can also have what are called classified boards of directors. So let's think about the United States House of Representatives. What percentage of those people are up for re-election every 2 years?
It's like 33%.
Oh man, our educational system has failed you so very deeply. Okay, so every 2 years, the entire freaking Congress, the House of Representatives gets voted, is basically up for election again. So that means you could have, within a 2-year period, you could have 100% turnover. Now, what about the United States Senate? Yeah, every 2 years, only 1/3 of them are up for election. How long is the term for a senator? 6 years, right? 6 years. Okay, so you can think of the United States Senate as being a classified board. It's going to take you 4 years at least to swap out the majority of the senators. And so you can set up your board of directors, maybe there are 12 members, and maybe everyone serves a 3-year term, but every year only 4 of them are up for election. And so that makes it harder for you to get your slate of directors in there if you are trying to take over the firm. Questions?
So is this made specifically for when the company goes public, or is this just set up?
So the corporate charter is set up, so by the way, every corporation has to have a corporate charter, right? And it's on file with the Secretary of State in whatever state that they're incorporated in, usually Delaware, now Texas is favorable if you're criminal, Nevada. But you've got your corporate charter on file with those people. Now, when you go public, then that corporate charter is going to be part of the prospectus that you put out, so people will know what they're getting into. Have I answered your question?
Who has the option to change it ever though? Is it
Okay, it can only be changed by a vote of the shareholders after it's gone public. But beforehand, right, before they go public, it's just a matter of getting the current investors to agree, which are like venture capital firms and the founders and things like that. Good question, other questions? Yeah, you can change the corporate charter down the road, but you have to do it with a vote of the shareholders. And by the way, when I see the board of directors trying to change a corporate charter, I always assume that they're trying to protect themselves or the managers, and I always vote against it. Questions? Okay, now let's talk about repurchase and standstill agreements. This one is best told with an example. I used to live in Ohio, and in Akron, Ohio, the big company in town was Goodyear. And what is the big product for Goodyear? Tires. So, but prior to World War II, Goodyear basically had 2 products. They had tires and they had blimps. You guys know about blimps? Okay, so, and the blimps were basically just an advertising thing, right? They weren't a moneymaker on themselves. Then World War II comes along, and we're in a world hurt. We need people to build stuff other than what they're normally building. So typewriter companies started making machine guns, and Goodyear actually started making Corsairs for the Navy, their airplanes. Now, did they do a decent job of making them during the war? Yes. Was it their main line of business? No. After the war, what do you think happens to the demand for airplanes? Whew! What should Goodyear do at that point? They should get out of the airplane business, but instead they're like, no, we're going to go big, and now we're going to be Goodyear Aerospace. We're even going to make satellites. Now, what the hell does Goodyear know about making satellites? Zero, right? Okay, now, another thing that they said, well, we should diversify into making shoes. What do shoes and tires have in common? Yeah, oh yeah, well, with the rubber compound, you know, certainly, like, shoes are like tires for your feet, right? And so Goodyear gets into making shoes. Now, what does Goodyear know about making shoes? Nothing. So Goodyear gets into a bunch of stupid crap. And as we've discussed earlier, these conglomerate acquisitions tend to destroy value. And so the Goodyear stock was not doing all that great. And so an Englishman comes in, and he basically makes a hostile takeover bid. He gets up to his 5%, and then he makes the announcement, and now it's on. And so the Goodyear managers invite him to come to Akron, and they have a meeting with him, and they say, wait a minute, you've paid somewhere, I'm just making up the numbers here, you've paid somewhere between $10 and $15 a share for our stock. Is that correct? And he said, yes. And they said, what if we were to buy your shares for $20 a piece? Is that a good deal for him? Yeah. Do you think he really wants to run a tire company? No. Okay, so, and that's called a targeted repurchase. Are they making that $20 offer to everyone? No. And by the way, whose money are they using to buy these shares back from the Englishman? The other shareholders, right? The other shareholders, it's their money that's going away. What does that mean? They are destroying shareholder value to keep the company from getting sold. And, but what do they ask for in return? They ask for a standstill agreement. They say, you got to leave us alone for at least 10 years. You can't try to come take over the company again for another 10 years. Why 10 years? Because most of these people were 55 or older, right? I'm not kidding. People are scumbags. Okay, now here's the fun thing. In order to come up with the money to make this targeted repurchase, what they have to do is sell a bunch of assets like the aerospace, the sneaker business. In other words, all that crap they shouldn't have had to begin with, plus they have to streamline their operations in order to be able to afford to stay independent. And so strangely, this guy actually did Goodyear shareholders a favor after the thing was over, because now Goodyear has to refocus on its business and on operational excellence. We call this green mail. So, do you guys know what blackmail is? What's blackmail? Yeah, so usually you've got some information, some pictures of someone in a compromising position with an exotic animal, something strange, and you say, you need to pay me or I will expose the information. Now, here's the trick. There are only two ways to respond to blackmail that work. If I pay, what's going to happen?
They'll do it again.
Yeah, they'll do it again. So I either, number one, need to expose the information myself and come clean, or number two, what's the other way to solve this problem? Get rid of the person and put that in real English. Kill him. You gotta kill him. Okay, now I do not recommend murder, so I would say if this happens, then you should just come out publicly with the information. For example, David Letterman you guys know who David Letterman was? Late night host? He had sex with his secretary on his desk. And someone had apparently pictures or something, and they were threatening to go public with it if he didn't pay. And so instead what he did is he went out, and during his monologue, he actually said he had to confess something, and he told this story. He says, I feel bad for my wife, but I feel even worse for my secretary, because now everyone knows that she had the bad taste to have sex with me. Right, so he kind of made a joke out of it. Did it really hurt him long term? No. Would murdering the person have hurt him long term? Probably. Okay, now, green mail is a little different. We're basically paying this person to go away. And we have a contract basically saying they can't come back and play this again for another 10 years. I'm going to tell you one more thing about the Goodyear scenario to let you know what scumbags people are. At the time, when this whole thing starts, Goodyear management goes on television and they say, good people of Akron, please go out and buy up all the Goodyear stock you can to keep it out of the hands of this filthy limey. By the way, that's a derogatory term for British people, right? Keep this out of the hands of these people. And, you know, we got to keep this an American company, right? And so people in Akron were going out and buying the stock. School kids were actually collecting their lunch money and going hungry to buy Goodyear stock to keep it out of the hands of this terrible, terrible Englishman. Now, what do you think the managers were doing at the exact same time? They're selling their shares. And who could blame them? It's the highest value those shares have had in years. Are those people scumbags? Absolutely. Okay, now let's talk about a poison pill. You're threatening to take over my company. What I want to do is make sure it is financial suicide for you if you do. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take on a boatload of debt, and I'm going to then pay out a dividend to my current shareholders. And so now I'm much less attractive as a target. By the way, would you rather marry someone with a lot of money, a lot of cash, or a lot of debt? A lot of cash, right? And so someone could make themselves unattractive if they gave away all their money and took on a bunch of debt. It's the same thing with companies, right? So I'm threatening to do this if they get too close. So it's basically making sure that they're going to negotiate with me. That's hopefully the goal here, is to get them to negotiate. We also have the share rights plan. This one's kind of fun. We know that they're going to have to announce after they have 5% of the shares. And so at that time, what I can do is say, okay, we are going to offer shares at half price to all shareholders who have already had shares for more than 1 year. Now, who does that exclude? It excludes the bidder who's just been buying up the shares over the last few weeks. And so basically now, and do you think people would jump on some half-price shares? Yeah. And now what happens is that the bidder no longer has 5% of the firm. Now they have 2.5%, right? So it makes it that much harder for them to take over the firm. Once again, that's something that we're going to threaten to do if they continue to come after us without sitting down to negotiate. That's the whole intention here. And I'm hoping that's the intention with our president's tariff stuff, is that he's trying to get people to the negotiating table. If the tariffs stay forever, if these things stay forever, it's bad. It's bad for the target shareholders. It's bad for the people. Questions?
Are these legal?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Now let's talk about going private. You might think of going private as a takeover, and it is, but if it's the management taking it over, it's basically defending against getting taken over by some outside bidder. And so you could actually take your company private, and if you do that, then there is no stock out there being traded on the market. It's impossible for someone to take you over without your permission if you are a private company. Questions? Now let's talk about divestitures. If the firm has to get rid of some assets, that's called a divestiture. And there are a few reasons that we do that. First of all is to avoid antitrust problems. Exxon and Mobil merged. But the problem was that a lot of the highway intersections out in West Texas and other places, every exit had a Mobil and an Exxon station, and that was it. Now, if you merge those two companies, what do you think is going to happen to the gas prices at those places where they're the only game in town? Yeah, it's going to go up. So the government said, guess what? You're going to have to sell, in those situations, you're going to have to sell one of the two gas stations. You don't care which one. You get to decide, but you got to sell them. And so what they did is they packaged up all those gas stations and they sold them to a refiner. I think it was called Diamond Shamrock at the time. It became Valero. And so if you've ever seen a Valero gas station, chances are it used to be an Exxon or a Mobil gas station, and they bought it as a result of a divestiture. Now, it was a vertical acquisition for them because they had refineries and now they've got gas stations. And so that would be one thing, would be to avoid these antitrust problems. Also, to raise cash to pay for the deal. These deals are expensive, and you want to go out and sell assets in order to raise cash. And which assets do you sell? The unwanted ones. When I was at Halliburton and we merged with Dresser, we had some bits of the business that were left over that we had no interest in. Ingersoll ran pumps, Waukesha compressors. We didn't want anything to do with that. So we were able to sell those assets and then use that money to pay down the debt that we issued to do the merger. Questions? Okay. Now, I am really not too concerned about you knowing all the details here, but here are some ideas on how we're going to do divestitures. First of all, the equity carve-out. We could actually put these undesirable assets into a completely separate company, and it's completely owned by the parent, and then you can sell a fraction of it to the public in an IPO. Why would you want to sell a fraction of it to the public in an IPO? Because that's how we figure out what it's actually worth. We put a true market value on it. And then we can go ahead and shop the rest of it out somewhere else. When I was with Halliburton, we put all of those unwanted assets into a carve-out, and then we sold that carve-out to a private equity firm. Number two, the spin-off usually follows the equity carve-out. The parent company is going to issue shareholders shares in that piece on a pro rata basis. What does pro rata mean? If I own 10% of the mother company, I'm also going to own 10% of this equity carve-out. When I was in doctoral school, my professor owned shares in, I think it was Procter & Gamble, and they actually spun out, I forget what it was that they spun out, but he was not interested in owning that particular thing. So he ended up selling those shares. I have shares in companies, I don't even know what the hell they do, because they've been spun out of other firms, and I've received pro rata shares in them. Then finally we have the split up. Back in the 1980s, we had a total of one telephone company, AT&T. And AT&T had these regional companies called the Baby Bells. And you couldn't make a phone call without engaging these people. What do you think phone calls were priced at then? Pretty high. So we're talking 1981. My mom bought me a new saxophone. I was very excited, and I wanted to call my friend Brent and tell him about it. My friend Brent lived one telephone exchange over. We wrote 417. He's only 6 miles away, but because he's one telephone exchange over, it cost me 10 cents a minute to call him. And my mom says, okay, to keep it short, right? Now, today, you can call the other side of the world for cents per minute, right? Why the change? Well, the United States in 1984 said, hey, wait a minute, that's a monopoly. We need to break this thing up. And sure enough, they broke it up. They made AT&T into the long distance provider, and then each of the Baby Bells became their own thing. And then they forced AT&T to lease their long distance lines out to other companies. And so companies like Sprint, MCI show up. What do you think happens almost immediately to the price of long distance? Starts to go down. And that was all because basically the government had broken the monopoly situation here. Now, the most recent one that I've seen has been General Electric. General Electric recently went through a split up, and now there's GE Aerospace and GE Medical. It's split up into different stuff. That was not a result of government action. That was a result of shareholders demanding basically that they get rid of the conglomerate discount that they had. Remember we just said earlier, when you have a conglomerate, you destroy value when you get into that, and you create value when you get out of it. So here's a fun adventure for you. Go out and look and see what's happened to the shares of the individual pieces of GE since they split up. They are undoubtedly performing than GE did before the split up. Okay, any questions? Yes?
Kind of look at the tech industry now, how bad does a business have to get for the government to step in and kind of break up the monopoly?
You know, so there's a whole lot of politics involved in this. And if you have Republicans in charge, usually they're a little more standoffish about it. The Democrats tend to want to jump on them. But in the end, if the company is politically favored, regardless of who's in power, they're not going to get attacked. You've got a situation here where do people generally like Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg? No. And so he's kind of become a target. And so I would not be surprised to see this kind of action taken on him. Other questions? Read chapter 17 for next time. Bring your slides. Have a great weekend.